Socrates likes plums. Are you referring to yourself in the third person? Do you like plums, Alcibiades? Do I like... Yes, I suppose they're okay. I'd rather have a peach or an orange or a banana, an apple, starfruit. Anything, really. Is this going somewhere, Socrates? I think they're fantastic. Plums. Play along, Alcibiades. It's a thought experiment. All right. But first, the presupposition. Let's clarify our assumptions, right? Let's be rigorous. First, assume physicalism. Assume it, okay? I'll soon ask you a question, but I want to talk to a scientist, so be a scientist, Alcibiades, and not St. Augustine. Don't get mystical on me. I'll do my best. Well, what's the question? The question is this. If everyone in the world, everyone, were physically identical to me, a biologically identical brain, physiologically identical body, identical sense organs, the tongue, identical down to the smallest hair follicle, would we all like plums as much as I do? Down to the smallest hair follicle. I'm not really a scientist, of course, but I'm not convinced that hair is involved in making those kinds of judgments. Seriously, think about it. We're all identical. No smallest possible variation. Do we have the same taste? That's the question. Try the plum. Is it fantastic? That word, fantastic. Okay, I'm thinking. Well, perhaps our past experience comes into play. No. Remember, Augustine, you're meant to be thinking like a scientist and a strict physicalist. The only real difference experience could make would be a physical difference. In this experiment, we're taking as a given that everyone trying the plum is physically the same, however they got that way. Culture, memories, it's not that none of this comes in. It's just that, as we've framed our discourse, it's already there. All right. That makes sense. It's physically represented. Okay. But Socrates, you are missing something. Physicalism's okay, but we're talking about judgments related to conscious perception, to taste. Let me add my own assumption, and we need it. Let's start with something like John Searle's view on consciousness. What's John Searle's view on consciousness? Well, if I understand it, he thinks that as first-person experience, it's not ontologically reducible. Those are his words. He's a professional philosopher, after all. But if I understand him right, he does think that it's biologically caused, and that's the part we need. For him, again with the philosophy talk, it's causally reducible. Okay, it's caused by neurobiology then. But caused precisely how? Well, Searle doesn't know. I mean, he knows, of course, that none of us knows. We haven't identified the mechanism, but he's proposing that we do know enough to know that it results from the physical biological processes in the brain. You won't mind adding this assumption, I think, Socrates. Consciousness is causally reducible. Anyway, it fits in well, perhaps, with the physicalism you're aiming at. Okay. It's added. We have our assumptions. Try the plum. All right. Well, my view is, I suppose, let's see. If consciousness is the consequence of only physical processes, and we have the same tongue, taste buds, the identical biological brain, down to the last hair follicle, as you say, then, assuming we're eating the identical plum, add that too, I think we must have the same experience. I like the plum. and not just as much as Socrates, but identically to Socrates. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. But what does or would this prove? Well, I think it demonstrates that a particular conscious experience is the inevitable result of a specific interaction. Interaction. Yes, a specific interaction between the plum and myself. You pointed out, of course, that we don't have the causal mechanism yet, but that's fine. That's Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness, isn't it? And it's somewhere upstream, I suppose. But this side of all of that, there's an objective interaction that we can and do know about. The interaction between a specific object of perception, the plum, and a specific perceiver or subject, in this case, myself. Now, as the plum is objective and physical, and the perceiver is also objective and physical, the qualitative result of the interaction is inevitable. Inevitably fantastic. We could call it an objective interaction. It's a physical process. This matters to us. Why? We'll need it. It will help us to develop some ideas on subjectivity. That's the topic. Really a quite dramatic rethink of subjectivity. And along the way, we'll be disproving some folk wisdom as well. I hope we're not defecting from common sense. I don't like doing that. So I've heard. No, I don't think so. In fact, if anything, we'll probably draw nearer to common sense in the process. What we're hoping to disprove is the proposition that there's no accounting for taste. Our contention will be this: there's nothing to account for. Well, I played along, Socrates, but back here in reality, back in my own body, it's simply the case that I don't seem to like plums nearly as much as you do. I weary of the topic. Plums. They're not bad, but there really is no accounting for taste. Of course, if I were still playing the strict physicalist, I suppose I might note that I have a different tongue than you, and a different brain. You're an individual. Yes, of course. But not an individual in the colloquial sense we normally mean. I mean, I am physiologically individual. My own sense organs and brain are, how would I say it, characteristically varied. I'm one of a kind. So you are, Alcibiades. But why don't we switch from plums to music? Please. Let's imagine this instead. A few of us are standing around listening to music, to disco. Staying alive. I think it's pronounced stayin' alive, Socrates. And some of us think it's, well, the best loop in pop music, the best, period. No argument here. I'm learning to play the bass line. It's what I do when I'm not thinking deeply about fruit. I'm with you so far. Well, some of us love it. Not all of us. A few of us think the Bee Gees are just okay. And one person doesn't like disco at all. They hate it. I don't know what's wrong with people. All that's down to personal taste, which I suppose is your point. Exactly. Personal taste. Our opinions on this sort of matter, we say, are subjective. But what precisely does that mean? What does it mean, Alcibiades, that we have personal taste? Well, it means, I suppose, that when we're all listening to the same music, that we each form a different personal, or let's say a different aesthetic judgment about it. I'm happy with those words. Same music, different aesthetic judgment. That's my answer. No. No. No, Alcibiades. We're wrong. Wrong in two ways about personal taste. Wrong. What's the first? Our first error is that we might conceive of taste as the disputed property of an object in itself. This is a little like saying that a scoop of vanilla ice cream contains 400 calories, that's the objective bit, but that we can't agree on whether ice cream is delicious. But we confuse ourselves if we imagine that there is a disputed taste of ice cream as though it were the property of the object. Okay, it all seems a bit pedantic to me, but I follow you. Tasting it all requires what we already termed an interaction. The object of perception meets the one who perceives. Although I prefer you to stick to the Bee Gees. Maybe you're hungry. Tasting, of course, relates uncontroversially to the object of perception. But tasting in itself is to be found only in the conscious subject's qualitative experience, in the context of a specific objective interaction. Okay, so personal taste is not the disputed property, you said, of an in common object of perception. What's the other error we make? The second error is rather more shocking. Should I sit down? The second way we might conceive of subjectivity of personal taste is as an unaccountably differing aesthetic judgment rendered against a presumed to be in common experience. Yes, there's no accounting for taste. Wait, what do you mean presumed to be in common? We're wrong, Alcibiades. We're imagining, and this is the absurd part, that we're all trying delicious ice cream and then deciding subsequently whether to like it or not. But there's no subsequent act of aesthetic judgment in such a case. To taste delicious ice cream is simply to enjoy it. That's all in the perception. Yes, the ice cream, the music, the object of perception itself is in common. But in each case of experience with a specific person, the objective interaction is unique. The experience is always inevitable, but inevitably different each time. In brief, we are not rendering unaccountably different aesthetic judgments on the same experience. We're reporting on different experiences. And the Bee Gees? Alcibiades. We're not hearing the same music. We're not hearing the same music. Think about it. Really think about it. I'm making the argument to some extent from common sense, but think of it from a more rigorous angle as we did in the thought experiment. Then think about synesthesia, or if you prefer, about certain forms of color blindness. Or think about your own wonderfully scientific definition, not of any anomaly, but of individuality. Physiology characteristically varied. Think, though, last of all, that consciousness isn't produced by the brain, as we're often told. Rather, it's always produced by a brain, specifically varied, individual every time. We're all listening to the same song, to staying alive, but consequent of our varied human biology, the objective interaction is inevitably unique. Nagel asked what it's like to be a bat. You seem to be saying, it depends which bat. Is it really so surprising? If being but human, we are physiologically varied, sense organs and brain, by consequence, so is our experience. On this view, subjectivity as such doesn't really exist, not as conceived. Personal taste, these were only the words we proposed to explain what we admitted were unaccountably different aesthetic judgments, rendered against a presumed to be in common experience. The whole situation is much simpler than that. We're not hearing the same music. No, you go too far, Socrates. The solution is too radical. Okay, but I could present it differently if I chose. Presented another way, it's common, it's familiar. It accords with a scientific outlook, it accords with our phenomenological reporting, when carefully reconsidered. But it also aligns with our common sense to the point of being almost pedestrian. Alcibiades, have you never been in a room and said, "It's cold in here"? What did you think you were commenting on? The temperature of the room or the temperature of your body? I don't know, the one, then perhaps the other. I am often cold, and it was at first a complaint about the environment. But if others weren't cold, after noticing how often I was, maybe it became a kind of self-knowledge. What's your answer then, the room or the body? Or both in interaction? Now add someone else to the room. It's your wife. While you're putting on a sweater, she's trying to open a window. Is this so unfamiliar? It begs a question, though. Are you and your wife in the same room? In the same room, but not in the same body, nor in the same experience. But the disagreement isn't about whether, when it's too cold, you should put on a sweater or open a window. You can both read the thermostat from here. You disagree surely about whether it feels too hot or feels too cold. You're bickering about qualia, inevitably different, and from your own first-person vantage. We're not hearing the same music. No. It seems personal taste, as such, does not exist. There is no unaccountably different aesthetic judgment rendered against an in common experience. Only us and our own first-person reporting on inevitably characteristic experience.